Hey, what's up? I'm Metal Horror Gamer, and I'm reviewing Victor Frankenstein. So, yet again, here is another adaptation to Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. And my first thought when I heard about this movie was, really? Another Frankenstein movie? It's like, how many Frankenstein movies can they make, and how many am I gonna have to watch? How many times will people try to recreate this story? But of course, now it's Victor Frankenstein. They had to add his whole name in the title. It's like Rocky 6 or what it's actually known as, Rocky Balboa. But maybe for this movie, it is a good title. Because whenever it was just called Frankenstein, people kept assuming that Frankenstein was the monster. And as we know, that is wrong. The monster is the monster. Frankenstein is the doctor. Now I know when I first saw Daniel Radcliffe in this movie, I thought he was going to play Frankenstein. But no, he's not playing Frankenstein. Surprisingly, he is playing Igor. And that's a problem for some people right there. Not because he's playing Igor, but because people didn't want Igor in this movie. Why is that, you ask? It is because Igor is not in the novel. But let me stop you before you say anything, because I know what you are about to say. But Igor was in the original Universal film. And let me correct you right now and say, no, he wasn't. There was a hunchback in that movie, but his name was Fritz. And yes, in later films by Universal, there was a man named Igor, played by Bela Lugosi. But he wasn't a hunchback. He was just a man who was hung and his neck was broken. That is all. A lot of fans of the novel want to see the novel put on the silver screen. So when they saw Igor, they knew that this wasn't going to be the film they had been waiting for. Speaking of Igor, I know him best from Young Frankenstein. Or perhaps is it Igor?
You must be Igor.
No, it's pronounced Igor.
But they told me it was Igor.
Well, they were wrong then, weren't they?
Speaking of Young Frankenstein, I think there's an Easter egg in here when Igor's love interest meets Victor Frankenstein. And yes, Igor has a love interest in this film. I will explain that later. She calls him Victor Frankenstein, or it was Victor Frankenstein, but I don't remember if it was Franken or Franken, but she said Steen instead of Stein, and he corrects her and tells her that it is pronounced Frankenstein. It's like a reversal of the joke in Young Frankenstein.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
You're putting me on.
No, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
Do you also say Froderick?
No, Frederick.
Well, why isn't it Froderick Frankenstein?
It isn't. It's Frederick Frankenstein.
I see.
And if that is an intended Easter egg, I say good job. But I digress. The film is called Victor Frankenstein. So you would think that he is the main character. But it doesn't seem like it at all. In my opinion, the film is more about Igor. Frankenstein and his experiments seem secondary to Igor, which is just strange, because why would you focus on Igor? Either way, it starts in the circus, and Igor is the hunchback of the circus. And he is in love with a girl who also works for the circus. She swings from rope to rope on top. I don't know what those things are called. I don't go to the circus. Anyways, she falls down and hurts herself. And this is where Frankenstein sees it, and so does Igor. And they both go there and they pretty much save her from dying. And since it was mostly Igor that knew how to save her, Frankenstein sees promise in Igor and he pretty much steals/frees him from the circus. This is where we find out that Igor isn't even deformed or a real hunchback. He just has some fluid in his back and no one ever took it out of him. So Victor removes it and makes him wear a back brace to straighten out his spine. So now Igor is a normal person, which is weird, but whatever. And I don't want to give away the whole film, but yeah, he goes to work for him and you can guess what they do. But like I was saying, the film seems to be more about Igor's life, like him being in love with the girl and them having a romance and him helping Frankenstein, than rather it actually being about Frankenstein, which seems like a creative way to bring new life into this world, but it just doesn't work for me. If the film is called Victor Frankenstein, then it should be about Frankenstein and his work. I don't need to know more about Igor's life. And he doesn't need a love interest. And besides that, all the other characters aren't very interesting at all either. Now, this is a Frankenstein film. This film does have monsters. But just like Frankenstein, they take a far back seat to everything else. The first monster you see is an animal. To be more specific, it's mostly made out of chimpanzee, which I like because usually with experiments, people use animals before they move to humans, and it's usually a chimpanzee. So it makes sense to go this route, but he goes away pretty damn quick. Then later on, there is the real human monster, but he is only in the film for like 4 to 5 minutes, and that's near the end. So this film really fails on the amount of time the monsters get in the film, because Igor wastes most of the time in this film with his city love interest and his backstory or how he feels about Frankenstein, and plus there are other characters eating time, which you don't need. The imagery, like the setting, is very appropriate and everything fits well in the movie, but it just doesn't have that awesome scary feel and look that the original Universal Frankenstein has. The laboratory doesn't even compare to the Universal set. The one in this film is just bland and boring to look at. The Universal set was great. It really set off your imagination. You really thought you were in like some crazy madman's laboratory. It was perfect. I think that the creators of this film really want us to focus on liking Igor and the bond between him and Frankenstein and his love interest, but it just doesn't work for me, not at all. But since I review horror movies and I'm reviewing this, I have to ask, is this a horror film? And I tell you, no, it's not. But to be fair, it was never trying to be. We all just lump it into horror because the novel was considered a horror back then, and so was the original film. But this movie isn't horror at all. It's more of a drama / action science fiction film. But wait, there is a huge problem with this film. I'm gonna be honest, the acting is pretty good. So is the setting and the lighting and the effects. But the whole movie feels lifeless, which is ironic because it's about life and death. I'm not quite sure what they were trying to do here. The whole movie just doesn't work. It never feels like it's one with itself. It's funny because I thought people were actually going to like it, and from what I've seen so far, it's doing horrible in the box office and getting tons of negative review. But after watching it myself, I can understand why people don't like it. But it's also hard for me to understand why they dislike it so much, because it's not that bad. Now, sure, there are some people that like this movie, but most seem to hate it. And I know some people complain that they want to see the film version of the novel, or some people want the directors to just take inspiration from Frankenstein and create something original instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. If anything, if you want to see a better modern Frankenstein type film, go watch Reanimator. That is a horror classic. It's funny, it's got lots of gore, and it's just fun to watch. I highly recommend that film. But can I recommend this? And the answer would be no. It's not a horrible film by any means, but at the same time, it's not a very good film. It's just okay. It's right on the border. It reminds me of how I felt about Dracula Untold. It's exactly the same way. It's not that bad, but it's not very good either. If you love Daniel Radcliffe and don't care about the Universal films or the original novel and actually like how the trailer looks, then by all means go see it and judge for yourself. You may like it, but for everyone else, I say skip it. It's just not really worth your time. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna go pop in my Blu-ray copy of the classic Universal film, Frankenstein, and have a good time. I hope you enjoyed my review, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.